If you've gotten to know me at all or listened to Tom at all today, you know that everything we do is predicated on a passionate belief in and a very often heartbreaking love for the church. For better or for worse, we are churchmen through and through, and that's nowhere more evident than in the relentless and pragmatic longing we both feel to see the latent capacity of God's worldwide body, the greatest mobilizer of philanthropic giving, the greatest mobilizer of volunteer labor and social capital, and the most extensive delivery system the world's ever known, harnessed for the sake of human flourishing. Some of us would even suggest that was God's original intent for this planet. But that combination of love and longing is coupled for both of us with a sober recognition that often the church's missional outreach in the world has been short-sighted, self-serving, and paternalistic. And even when it's not, we've tended to focus on easy answers to complex problems that create distortions and dependencies that leave recipient communities worse off rather than better. In short, what we all know now is the kind of helping that hurts, which is what brings us here. We come up here, we invite others to come up on this stage out of the conviction that the church can do better, that the church can play a strategic role in creating lasting, sustainable solutions to the complex challenges of poverty. And I suspect that that's why many of you are here and not just Lynette. That your pastors, church staff, volunteers, business people, nonprofit leaders, others, and we're grateful for all of you. But I want to offer a particular word of encouragement today to those of you leading missions in your church, whether as a pastor, a member of the congregation, or a member of the staff. You are the ones on the front line of figuring out whether the church can do this, how the church can not just make a difference, but if and how it will make a difference that lasts, and at the same time leaves the dignity of those you're seeking to serve intact. And all of this that we've done here today was created for you. Sat Talks is the front door to a network. As you heard Tom say, a tribe, you might say, of people who feel compelled, whether by God or their own conscience, to wrestle with the hard work of moving beyond helping that hurts and becoming part of sustainable solutions to poverty. In previous years, we've included talks that have offered several conceptual frameworks we've found helpful to churches in breaking down the complexity. And I want to review those quickly here before I talk a little bit more about the actual work we're finding churches must do to get beyond helping that hurts. The first is the most familiar now, and thanks to pioneer authors like Bob Lupton, Brian Fickert, and others, the terms are common in the vocabulary of most church mission leaders. They describe the types of help churches typically provide, beginning with emergency relief. Familiar handouts of food, shelter, clothing. It's nearly always one-way giving, the purest form of charity. To that, churches most often add individual betterment activities, training, tutoring, and other forms of education and equipping, that proverbial hand up to those ready to take initiative in improving their prospects. And these are the low-hanging fruit of church missions, the familiar success stories our churches love to tell, and we're good at them. When used appropriately, they can bring life-saving stability to people in crisis and overcome inequities in the opportunities available to those born on the wrong side of town. But we've also discovered that when used exclusively, our best efforts here often deplete the very communities we aim to help as they become an exit strategy for the best and the brightest. So this framework calls for a third dimension of mission, community development, that addresses the overall quality of life of the community and the need for things like employment and home ownership, access to the opportunities and networks of exchange that are necessary to make an entire community a place where people want to live and not leave. The second framework is one we use to describe what churches typically do internally to mobilize resources for mission. Recognizing that people's first impulse when they decide to do something for God is typically to give something. And the simplest, most common thing to give is money. And so the time, work, and systems churches use to mobilize money, we've called Missions 1.0. When people are inclined to take the next step and start giving of themselves, they most often begin giving their time and energy through volunteering. And the work and systems churches use to mobilize people, we've called Missions 2.0. And while these are both important steps for each of us to take in our spiritual formation, and they also provide critical resources for the church's mission work, they too become liabilities when seen as ends unto themselves. We become enamored with how much we can raise, how many people show up, and we're naturally drawn to deploy these resources in relief and betterment, thinking the more we give and the more we serve, the more we help the poor and their communities. But again, we've seen that's not the case, and so this framework calls churches to another level, what we've called Missions 3.0, and a focus on solutions, where churches are willing to add to their money and people the structures and strategies necessary for sustainable transformation. The third framework is one we've introduced to help churches begin to understand the overwhelming and often paralyzing tension they feel when they make any serious attempt to upgrade their mission work and cross the line in those other frameworks from relief and betterment to development, or from Missions 1.0 or 2.0 to 3.0. In a talk last year, Tom unpacked what we have identified as the 4 inherently competing interests at play when trying to move a church beyond charity. So briefly, they're the volunteer, members of resource churches who want to do something good, who want to live out their faith, perhaps even grow in their faith through positive volunteer experiences. The resource church is seeking to disciple its congregation and make a difference in the world for the sake of the gospel by effectively mobilizing and deploying money and people through positive volunteer experiences. Ministry partners are either church or parachurch entities devoted to addressing a particular need or helping the community with money and people from resource churches. And the community is comprised of the intended beneficiaries of all the other 3. The most important thing we've found to understand about these 4 domains, as we've called them, is the inherent tensions that exist between the legitimate hopes and needs of each of these domains. What we found keeping pastors and mission directors and lead volunteers awake at night, and what we've experienced repeatedly ourselves, is the challenge of doing missions differently while managing the competing needs of these 4 interests. And we've made the case that the only way to move your church beyond helping that hurts and toward more sustainable and transformative missions is to resolve those tensions, not by elevating any one domain over the others or by focusing on just a couple of them, but by integrating all 4 into a comprehensive approach to missions. So, among the many things these frameworks help make clear is that churches wanting to move beyond helping that hurts have to be willing to intentionally make changes that won't otherwise happen on their own. But they've also helped us see the importance of what I'll call the skills or the techniques, or here, the practices of integration. Those practices that move a church toward truly integrating the needs of all 4 of those domains, toward a truly comprehensive mission strategy encompassing a continuum of relief, betterment, and development, and ultimately toward having a truly transformative and sustainable impact in the world. What are those practices? I'll touch on the 4 that we've seen so far. Practice 1, reframing the DNA. Churches that are moving beyond charity are finding ways to establish sustainability as the end goal of their mission efforts. You heard this theme through Lynette's comments about what's happened at St. Luke's. They're finding that getting it into the DNA of the church helps leaders and church members begin to understand and celebrate different achievements. It helps shift the emphasis, even subtly, from how wonderful we are to how capable others are and how successful they are becoming. We call it reframing because we find that most churches that are wrestling with this have some missional elements in their DNA. They just tend to be so vaguely defined that the church gets comfortable doing the easier stuff, the stuff that offers immediate gratification. Even if a church's vision is for its mission work to transform a community, you can fit almost anything into that. Sustainability, on the other hand, requires greater focus and specificity and can help the church dial down to something more concrete and grounded in the reality they hope to change. While reframing the DNA may involve rewriting official statements of purpose and vision, it usually begins with someone simply stirring the pot, asking different questions, and gently fanning the flames of holy discontent among people who start to wonder if what they're doing when they volunteer for relief and betterment efforts is really making a difference. We're finding that this practice is less about critical mass and more about critical yeast. Maybe just a few people, sometimes at first only one, infusing the rest of the loaf, passing out Toxic Charity and Charity Detox and other books like Candy to people who are asking the same questions, who keep sending people links to SAT Talks and using resources from Poverty Cure and others to reshape the conversations in their church and reframe the church's expectation of missions. Championing collaboration. Many churches have long understood the importance of working with people rather than doing our missions to them or for them. But churches moving beyond charity are pushing past the kind of superficial cooperation that's common among churches, the kind of working together that does not require sacrifice, that doesn't equalize power in decision-making, that doesn't produce lasting change and leaves the parties fundamentally unchanged. Instead, these churches are learning the lessons of approaches like collective impact, a far more rigorous process comprised of a common agenda, shared measurements, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and a backbone organization. These churches understand that complex solutions require complex equations. For them, believing we're going to tackle the complexity of community development without collaboration is like believing we're going to achieve racial reconciliation through an MLK celebration. You'll hear more about the power of this kind of work from Quinn Shipper of Stillwater Cares, and about measurement systems from Mike Simon. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying that some churches have found in this an almost divinely appointed opportunity to multiply their witness in their community by not just championing collaboration, but stepping up to become a catalyst for collaboration by funding the backbone organization. Tackling outcomes. Churches moving beyond helping that hurts understand the importance of data. They get the difference between an output and an outcome. And they're talking about more than the church's traditional big six tally for missions. You heard Lynette refer to a few of these, how much money we've raised, how many people were involved, and how many raised a hand, and how they felt, how much stuff we collected, how many we gave it to, and how grateful they were. Instead, these churches are not just ready to tackle the hard questions of what to measure and why to measure it, but they're also ready to do the hard work of figuring out how to measure it. They're hungry for tools and willing to embrace technology when it can help collect and understand the necessary data. But perhaps most importantly, these churches and their partners are taking the risk and learning the value of rigorous evidence-based evaluation, following the lead of pioneers like Florence Mundi, who told us last year about the experience of subjecting her entire ministry to a rigorous independent outside evaluation. Which is why we're excited to have people like Grace Darness to unpack creative methodologies for assessing a ministry's impact on quality of life outcomes in a community, or to hear from Phil Hissam of Polis Institute about the Neighborhood Stress Index, and from Mike of Simon Solutions about Charity Tracker. These are the tools and technology that can help churches get beyond the superficial self-congratulating we've been used to. And finally, cultivating innovation. Churches we see moving beyond helping that hurts, cultivate innovation. This often means creating space inside and outside the church for new kinds of leaders with different spiritual gifts, new ministries that don't look anything like they've done before, and as you'll hear later, new kinds of missionaries. It means giving them resources and allowing them the freedom to take risks. You just heard from Lynette about what that looked like for a large church in Orlando. You'll hear from Amy Minnick what a theology of business might look like. And it's also people like Randy White who created Spark Tank to connect entrepreneurs with social venture capital. For some churches, it may mean incubating projects under the radar, so to speak, until they've had time to produce the kind of stories the congregation wants to hear. For others, it means allowing people to turn traditional models upside down. We've learned how that was done in orphan care by Zoe Ministries, and how Rainbow Network used donated money to build houses to sell to the poor and recycled the proceeds for additional construction and community projects. These are the practices of churches that are moving beyond helping that hurts. And again, we've learned that it takes focus and intentionality over time, 3 to 5 years of focused leadership internally to transition a church in this direction, and 2 years of external support, which again is what this network is for. Connecting you with others on the same journey, practitioners, potential partners, models and tools, projects where you can practice, trips where you can go see for yourself, and peer learning communities that help accelerate the learning curve for churches that are ready. And what these churches find is that integration helps convert the tensions that they live in into traction, and allows them, as you'll hear clearly from others later, to change the stories that we tell. And that creates the opportunity for us to tell the greatest story that we have to tell. Thank you.